Hi, I'm Pastor Gail Bach.
And I'm Pastor Peter Johnson.
And I want to welcome you to A More Just World. When George Floyd was killed, the people of St. Andrew wanted to know how they could help. And so we immediately started gathering food and supplies and delivered them to the people of Minneapolis. But we wanted to do more, and we can do more. The issues of discrimination, prejudice, injustice have been around a long time, and it doesn't feel like they're getting any better. A More Just World is an initiative created to give the people of St. Andrew a way in which we can come together to listen, to learn, and to engage in conversation with the hope of finding ways in which we can be a part of making a more just world.
What you're going to see here in this video is a presentation by Steve Starks and his children, Anna and Steve Jr. Steve is an employee here at St. Andrew Lutheran Church for many years, so not only is he a colleague, but he's also a friend. Now, Steve grew up in South Minneapolis, and so he comes with a unique perspective as a Black man in our community to share some stories of what it was like to grow up in Minneapolis, Black, to raise kids in this community. He will share stories of his experience of racism, all of them will. They'll talk about their impressions and reactions to the George Floyd murder. And they'll also provide, of course, for us some words of encouragement as we seek to be a community together moving forward. Note that a few of the things that you will hear may be a bit disturbing as well. So this is all part of a more just world, an opportunity for us to listen. And that is our call here today, is to listen to our friends Steve and Anna and Steve Jr. What is the Black community telling us? What might we have to learn to create a more just world? So welcome to our video presentation, and stay tuned for ways that you can sign up to be part of a discussion group to talk about this video, as well as other ways that we will be leaning into the topic of race in our world as we seek to create a more just world. Thanks for joining us.
First of all, I want to thank all of you for your willingness to spend a little time with us and to help us listen and learn. I'd like to begin with the first question, which is for you to tell us a little bit about where you grew up in Minneapolis and a few reflections on what you are feeling today after the events of these past couple of weeks.
Okay, well, I'll start a little bit. So I grew up in South Minneapolis, around 47th and Portland, which is not far from 38th in Chicago, where the George Floyd incident occurred. I had friends in that area. I was down there a lot during the school year and the summers, spent a lot of time down there. One thing about where I grew up, and I had talked to Pastor Lilliard a little bit after all this stuff started happening, and excuse me. So the area that I grew up in, there was about a 4 square block section of Minneapolis, and that was one of the few spots around there where Black people could live, or mixed families could live, interracial. My mom was Norwegian and German, and my dad was Black. And back in the 50s, when they got married, that was not a very popular thing. So when they started looking for houses, they were limited to certain areas of the metro area that they could live. One thing that I have, I guess, found out since then is that if we've heard about redlining, you could not get a federally backed mortgage if you lived in certain areas which were redlined on a map. So that was kind of the segregation back then and the separation of us. And what happened is that you had pockets of Black families or interracial families that lived throughout the city, but they didn't cross over. I guess by the time I grew up and went to school, the schools were desegregated and mixed, and I had friends on both sides. I had white friends, I had Black friends. There weren't a lot of Native Americans in my area. that was further north towards downtown. But we grew up going to Our Savior's Lutheran Church, which is on 24th in Chicago, which is in that neighborhood with Native Americans. My mom was very active with the church and different, she was an activist basically, and I grew up with mom fighting both Why Wounded Knee, POW, MIA, civil rights for all kinds of people. So I grew up in that. Being a mixed race, I saw both sides. You know, we'd go to my mom's side of the family for birthdays or parties or Christmas or just to hang out with our cousins. We'd go to my dad's side and they were like night and day and totally different. So growing up in this it's not new to me. The police actions, the systemic racism, I've grown up in it, and it's a little defeating sometimes because you try to make change and nothing changes. So that's part of it. And when, you know, over the last 10, 15 years with all of the black killings, I guess, by police officers, and to me this isn't totally about racism. There's a few different things, and we can get into that later, but the thing that sparked everything was the police department and how they deal with black people that they pull over or that they have encounters with. So when the George Floyd killing happened, it was shocking, very shocking. And like I said, my youngest son and my fiance, they live 2 blocks away from there. And I've stopped in that store where George Floyd had allegedly passed a counterfeit bill. I've been in there many times, and that could have been me with a $20 bill that I got changed from someone else. You don't know. And so that's a little bit of my background.
Yeah. I think with George Floyd's killing specifically, we've seen however many black men killed by police officers over the last however many years, and we've somewhat gotten desensitized to it, to seeing these black men be murdered and women be murdered on video. And with George Floyd's killing, there's no debate that there was no resistance. There's no argument on he should have just complied or he shouldn't be resisting. He was handcuffed and there's no denying. So this one I think was hitting a little bit different because there is no denying. People like to act like this is not a race issue. This is just, oh, he should have just listened to the police officers. But I think with George Floyd's death specifically, he was there's no denying that this was a cold-blooded murder. There's no denying that, and I think that has helped the outrage and shock to people that like to ignore these kinds of things and act like they're not happening. You don't really have a choice at this point because there was no reason that man should have been dead at the end of that encounter.
And to that, I mean, it's the video was full enough, I guess, in my eyes, that the people who live out here in the suburbs or the people that aren't around this every day, I think it's actually kind of woke up a lot of people to actually say, you know, this does happen, and this did happen. So it's like Anna said, there's no denying what happened here, and it's not about a black guy, although it is. It's about just treating everyone the same, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah. You know, and there's a lot more that we could go on, but
Yep.
there'll be more time for more dialogue, too. So.
Let's go on to the next question here too, and looking back a little bit further now from the more recent events of George Floyd's death, earlier on to your first experiences with racism yourselves. What was your first experience with racism, and do you think things have changed?
I can start unless one of you want to start.
You're darker than we are.
Okay, so I can't say that I remember my first experience with racism because, as I said, growing up where I grew up, it was just always there. I do remember one time that I remember specifically when I was younger, I don't know, maybe 9 or 10. I guess the first time I had been called a nigger. And that was actually by my first cousin. We went over there to watch fireworks, and they lived in Bloomington, and we'd watch them at the Met Center or the Met Stadium. They did fireworks there, and we'd sit in the tree house and watch fireworks. But they also had a pop-up camper that we would go play in and stuff during the day. And we were in there in the camper, and I don't remember what we were arguing or fighting over a toy or something like that. I don't know, but then he just got mad at me, and he's a couple years younger than me, and said, nigger. and this was my cousin.
It's crazy.
And I didn't know what to do, because that's the first time I remember being called that. I was little, and I went in and told my mom, and he got in trouble, but my aunt and uncle didn't really say much about it. My aunt, who was my mom's sister, is my godmother, and she didn't have the same feelings as her husband, Uncle Bob, who grew up in southern United States, and so his upbringing was a lot different. That was one side. Another aunt of mine that lived in New Brighton, Aunt Louise, which was my mom's other sister, and her husband, Duffy, they did not have my dad out to their house because they were afraid of what the neighbors would think. And he had never been to their house up until he had cancer, like a few months before he died, which was the first time. And this is our family.
Yeah. And we're a really close-knit family, too, which is kind of, I mean, hearing that, it's baffling to me that.
And, going back to my godmother, I do remember that my mom told me that she told her Bob, Bob, my uncle, that, I don't care how you feel about black people, but this is my family. And so that was encouraging, but, and they all, and I mean, they were great. And us kids went over there a lot, and we played, and did stuff a lot together. Not so much in New Brighton, which back then I think was a lot more racist than it is now. But so those are a couple of my experiences with my family. I mean, I've been stopped multiple times by the police. I remember one time that I went out to dinner. I had a glass of wine with dinner, just one glass. And there was a police coming down the road as I exited the parking lot, and he followed me for about a mile. And I got about 3 blocks from my house, and I turned the corner down to the street for my house, and his lights went on. And it was dusk. It wasn't dark out, but it was dusk. And so I pulled over. And one thing you should know, too, when I get stopped by the police now, by the time he gets to my door, my windows roll down, I have a license in one hand, registration and insurance in the other, and both hands on the wheel, because I don't want to reach down to my console to grab my wallet and have him think that I'm reaching for something else. So that's one thing that I always do. Fortunately, I mean, I know how to talk to people. I don't talk back. Yes, sir. Do you know why he pulled you over? In this case, I didn't. He said, well, your license plate light is out. And one thing that I know, it's not I'm a mechanic, I check cars, I make sure all my lights are working because I know if you give them a reason to pull you over, they're gonna pull you over. And from my experience, so I make sure, just like a truck driver, before you leave, you make sure all your lights are working, your blinkers are working, and you don't have any probable cause to pull you over. So, but he told me my light was out on my license plate. So I gave him all my stuff, and he went back to his he asked me if I'd been drinking. I said yes, I had a glass of wine with dinner. And after a couple minutes, he went back to run all my stuff. And then he came back and handed me my stuff, and he said, okay, you're good to go. And he said, oh, by the way, I tapped on your light and it came back on. Well,
Stop.
I watched him in my rearview mirror the whole time. He never once went back to the back of my truck. So those are things. You know, I've been stopped other times, 35W. I remember another time coming from downtown. I live in Bloomington. He followed me from the time I got on the freeway downtown on 5th all the way to 66th Street exit, which is just past 62, and I went around there, and I'm with my fiance, Callie, and he stopped me there, and I had a glass of wine for dinner, and he asked me again, or this state trooper asked me, and I told him yes, I had a glass of wine with dinner. So he ran me through the whole field sobriety test, and you know, they make you stand on one leg and hold your arms out straight and count as high as you can go. And I got up to 65 the first time on one leg, which is pretty good. Well, then he said, okay, now do the other leg. I got up to about 40, and he said, okay. And so I did that. I did touch your nose. I did close your eyes, touch your nose, walk a straight line, heel toe, heel toe. And each time I passed all his field sobriety tests. So then I hear a click, and he pulled out his breathalyzer and put the straw in there. At this point, I'm thinking, is this necessary? Because I'm clearly not drunk. I mean, I'm talking, I'm not slurring, I'm standing, he did this thing, my eyes aren't dilated. But then I blew in the breathalyzer, and I was clear. I was barely even registered. And so he goes back to his car and comes back 10 minutes later and says, thank you for drinking responsibly and driving. And gave me my stuff and let me go. But that was, I think in that moment, I could have been belligerent, which is not my nature. You know, a lot of people, and I have friends, white friends that I've been with that have been stopped, and they talk back to the cops. And you know what? I'm not going to talk back to cops because that gives them one more reason to, you know, I've been taken out of the car and handcuffed and put on top of the hood and asked to search my vehicle. And you know what? I know by law I don't have to let them search my vehicle if they don't have probable cause. But just because being in that situation, I say you can search my vehicle. I don't care because I'm not trying to provoke them at all. So, those are some of my experiences with racism. And a lot of times I don't like to say racism because it's really general. That's the systemic racism. That's the police factor that a lot of what's going on currently is about. So those are some of my experiences with that factor. So if that makes sense.
I saw a quote, I don't remember who it was from a white celebrity, and he said, I've been pulled over however many times in my life, and not one of those times have I feared for my life, but I know that my black counterparts fear for their life anytime those lights go on behind them. And just that, the knowing that fear is existent in other people's, it's fear that your life is at stake simply because driving while black. And it's something that not a lot of people realize because it doesn't affect them daily. But that's a very, very real and prevalent thing in community.
And just to add to that I just thought of, and I don't know how often people get pulled over. Jim Schimmelfinnig, I think, who was my former boss here, and he worked here. I think a lot of people know him. he told me once that he's never gotten a ticket, for speeding. He's been stopped a couple times, I think is what he said, but never gotten a ticket. He's had a verbal warning. I'm totally opposite. I've never had a verbal warning, even going 5 miles over the speed limit or 3 miles over, and I've been stopped going 3 miles an hour over the speed limit. Goodhue County once, I was in a band for a long time. We played down in La Crosse, and coming back through Goodhue County, I got stopped going 3 miles an hour over the speed limit, and they took me to jail.
Oh my goodness, I didn't know about
And they
that.
put me in a little tiny jail. My bass player who was riding with me had to drive my car to the jail. And back then, this was before Venmo and, cell phones and stuff. And it didn't make sense. And I stayed in jail for 3 hours, and he had to wait for me to get out of jail. Well, why didn't you just give me a ticket and let me go? And again, especially Goodhue County, I've heard stories about the sheriffs down there. And so that's another thing. But I've never gotten a verbal warning saying, okay, slow it down. Every time I've been stopped for speeding, which isn't a lot, maybe 4 or 5 times in my life, and I've gotten a ticket each time. So.
Next question. What were your first thoughts when you heard about the death of George Floyd?
I was scrolling through Facebook one morning. That morning, was that Tuesday morning or
Memorial Day, Monday.
Yeah, it was Monday. And just laying in bed, that's what I do. And just scrolling, I saw this link to this video. And obviously everybody knows the video and has heard of it and probably has seen it. And it was just so bizarre watching the video. And it really kind of struck a strong chord with me because it was just the circumstances. You had one officer crowd control, and you had a bunch of people recording it on their phones, and then you had 2 officers behind the cop car holding him down, his torso and his legs, and then you had another cop with his hands in his pocket with a knee on his neck, and just the very coldest stare. And it was so bizarre watching this happen. And you see this black man laying on his stomach with his hands behind his back, handcuffed, and instantly you're like, why, what is this, what's happening, what are you achieving right now by sticking your neck on this, or sticking your knee on this man's neck, which isn't protocol to begin with. And you can hear the life being strangled out of this man, and it was just super just dark energy and just inherently evil, and his face just didn't change. And I remember watching it and what is everybody's freaking out, recording it, and you just have this man nonchalantly with his hands in his pockets, and you literally in this video watch him die. And it was it hit me such a strong way to where, I don't know, it really shook something up. I mean, that's what caused me and Anna to really get out there. And it was horrifying, absolutely horrifying. I never thought I would have seen a man die, and then I watched it on this video that's all everywhere. And it just, I don't know, I was breathless. I didn't know, I was so many different emotions, I was horrified, I was angry, I was confused, but I mean, it was terrifying.
Yeah, I know my first thought was, oh no, here we go again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the first thing I thought of. I said, this isn't cause a bunch of problems.
I still have yet to watch the entire video. I watched about 10 seconds and I knew what was going to happen. I had it sent to me in the morning. A few people had sent it to me. My uncle sent it to me first, and I watched it. And seeing the video at first, I saw it said Minneapolis. I didn't know where. Then when I saw that it was right outside of Cup Foods, which is blocks from where my dad grew up, and this is a black man in an area that my dad frequents, that, like he said, my brother lives 2 blocks away, that the possibility that could have been my dad or any other black man or woman that I love was one of the most terrifying moments or thoughts or realizations for me. because with you see things that happen in Texas or California or Colorado, wherever it may be, and it's painful to watch, but when it's literally in your backyard, it's a very different feeling. It's a very eerie feeling, and it set a fire inside of me, and it was just knowing that could have been so many people that I love, and that's a place that I am comfortable with and that I know. It was just a terrifying thought, and that was I could feel when I watched the first however many seconds of the video and turned it off that this is different. This is not going to sit well with the world. This is going to be a different situation, and I think as we see now, this is a very different situation. So I think that the feeling from watching the stills of this video, seeing the stills being populated on the internet, for me, it was the spark to a very, very large fire, both physically and systemically, really.
What compelled you then to join in the protesting that happened immediately after?
I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I couldn't think of anything else other than this man laying there, and I couldn't justify sitting at home knowing that this is not right. The energy is not right. Knowing that there's protests going on, I couldn't not be a part of it. I could not get it. I couldn't in my soul sit still. And I called my dad, and I knew the dangers of going out and protesting. The first time that we went out and protested, we were tear gassed. They shot rubber bullets at us. They shot, what are they called, flashbangs, and we were peaceful. We were standing there, and we were outside of the 3rd precinct, and we were just standing, just making our presence known, chanting and having posters. There was no weapons, there was no anger, no fire, anything, and we constantly tear gas. There was maybe 12 officers standing on top of the precinct shooting at us just standing there. We had to dodge many rubber bullets, and they were just hitting people standing there with signs, not doing anything, no threat, just standing there exercising our First Amendment right. And the way that the police reacted to it was terrifying, but that's the exact thing that we were fighting. And that was the first time that I went and protested. And then the next day I called my dad, and I told him I can't, because he had told me, be careful, be safe. I understand why you need to be out there, but you need to be careful and be safe and come home when it's time to come home. And I called him, and I told him the next day the protests were getting a little bit more rowdy because the police were obviously doing a lot extra than they should have been. We're not being peaceful on their end, but I called my dad, and I told him that I can't sit still. Everything is just on fire inside of me, and I can't sit here. I need to go out with my people and fight this injustice. And I don't think I really had a choice, because like my dad said, my grandma's been an activist for I don't know how long. My dad and his siblings have all been marching. I was marching with Philando, for Jamar, and I didn't have a choice. I couldn't sit at home while this is happening. There's no doubt nothing would have stopped me from going out there. It's my duty to fight for my people and continue to raise a voice of one that is not heard well in this country.
I think too is, while watching that video, you watch it, and my first thought is, why isn't anybody stepping in? Why isn't anybody helping this defenseless man on the ground? And I've just felt completely helpless, and I'm sure I share that with a lot of people. And it's like, if I were there, what could I or would I have done? But the fact is, we weren't there, and so how else can we help besides getting out there, getting our voice heard, letting people in power know that this is completely unacceptable and people need to be held accountable in order for good change to happen. Mm-hmm. And it was, I'm just feeling helpless, I think, was the strongest driving point for me, because while you might feel helpless in the moment, ultimately, like, power rests in our hands, and we're not helpless, and a lot of people have that bog them down. Mm-hmm. when there are choices and actions you can take to make at least progress, step in the right direction.
And as history has shown, protesting and exercising your First Amendment right, expressing your concern with the way that the government and the way that the police is controlling the people and protecting and serving its people, showing your disapproval of that, it's worked in the past, and it's going to continue to work, as you can see now. But yeah, I think we didn't really have a choice. Also, the way we were raised too outspoken and strong to sit down on this one.
Steve, what were some of your thoughts as you watched the protests, knowing that there were people you knew and loved in those protests?
Well, that's kind of a tricky one because I didn't go to the marches, the protests. I did go down to Cup Foods where they started the memorial and it still goes on. But like Anna said, you know, I talked to her and to them, and I was excited that they were out there and they wanted to do something because something needs to be done. I was nervous because of, you know, the possibilities, what could happen with the riots. And like I said, make sure you're safe, be smart, and come home when it's time to come home. Meaning if things start getting rowdy like they did, it's time to move because you don't want to be another statistic. So, in the rioting, no one condones that. And as we've heard, you know, subsequent to the rioting, most of that was not started by the peaceful protesters.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
When that first time that we went protesting, when there was when we got tear gassed, they were there's an auto zone next to the precinct, and the precinct is over here. We are all focused on the precinct. There was a man with a hammer hitting windows in AutoZone, and as soon as we heard that glass shatter, we were all looking this way, but as soon as we heard that glass shatter, we all looked over and saw this man doing this, and he didn't seem to be part of the protests, and there was multiple protesters that went and stopped that man from doing what he was doing, because that's not why we are there. We are not there to cause that kind of a disruptance, and seeing that was an outsider coming, seeing an opportunity to come cause havoc, that's kind of what continued to happen.
And one thing I do think about it's different when, if you look at some of the KKK rallies or something, and a lot of times those aren't peaceful, but the police handling of a situation, a KKK rally, is very different than handling a situation of a Black Lives Matter, we'll say, protest. They react different. Yeah, they may still have their riot gear on and all that, but they're not provoking things. They're there to kind of monitor the rally. But then it's called a rally, not a protest.
Right.
You know, so those are some of my thoughts.
What do you think it will take to make progress against racism in the world today?
No, I will start with this one. Because to me, there's multiple issues here. I don't think we will ever abolish racism. To be honest, I don't think that's going to happen. Progress against racism, to me, it takes the parents. The people who are 80 years old, they were raised in this world. And they teach their children this. And they teach their children this. It takes the new families that are now to be a little more progressive in how they're raising their children. You know, it's a lot easier in the metro areas now that schools are more diverse. I know where my kids go to school, I mean, there's 21 different countries represented. And so it's very diverse. So the kids grow up together and they have friends across all different races, multicultural friends. So I think about my kids and Carter, who's almost 10 now. His school, he goes to Seward Montessori School, which is over by Augsburg. But like I said, I think they have 21 different countries represented there. And he's got friends that he goes on play dates with and that he goes and hangs out with. But it's going to take that generation to kind of raise their kids right, to be accepting, to be equal. The harder part is when you get to the more rural areas where there is no diversity. You know, the farmers, if they've been raised this way, they keep raising their kids that way. So that's why I say I don't think racism will ever end, but the systemic racism, there's a political side to this, the whole systematic targeting, profiling. It goes to the imprisonment of black people. If you look at, I have a friend who recently got out of prison. Due to the COVID, when that started happening, they started releasing prisoners who were the high-risk ones, I guess, older, and he told me what they all were. Well, where he was in Duluth, they did not release any black prisoners. He said they released white prisoners that were 35 years old, totally healthy, that, you know, still had 5 years left on their sentence, but they didn't release any black prisoners. So that's the whole systemic piece of this, you know, and it, unfortunately, it will take leadership of our government who actually believes in equality to make changes. And whoever gets voted in, that needs to be a priority of theirs. And I know there's Trump supporters everywhere, but Trump is not the answer to this. He incites this, and if we've all watched the news and heard his comments, he's choosing to go down to Tulsa, Oklahoma on Juneteenth, which was the anniversary of ending slavery.
Stupid.
And he's going to down there where Black Wall Street, the massacre happened of black people on that particular date. So tell me that doesn't send a message.
And I think as far as raising your kids and continuing changing the narrative essentially for the next generation, it starts with having uncomfortable conversations. It starts with checking your own personal biases and personal prejudices and beliefs that you may not have had any control over, that may have passed on to you from your parents, and questioning those things and educating yourself to the point where you understand what is going on in the world, regardless of if it's affecting you daily or not, because there are millions of people that it is affecting daily. And it starts with educating yourself, and there's so many resources out there that you can watch, videos and movies and articles you can read, and that will tell you how this country is set up to oppress black people, how it was set up in that way, and having those uncomfortable conversations coming out of yourself so that you can grow and learn and understand that things aren't equal all across the board, and understand why they're not, how they were put in place to continue essentially legal slavery is what's going on now with mass incarceration, and there's many documentaries you can watch about that, but educating yourself and having those conversations is what's going to expand your knowledge and expand your understanding. And like my dad said about people in much rural areas, I went to school in Wahpeton, North Dakota for a semester, and the people that I encountered there, them going to college and was their first time seeing a black person in real life. The only time that they had seen any people of color was on TV, in movies, in magazines, on social media, whatever it may be. And if you look at the way that that we are portrayed in media and Hollywood, that's the only narrative that you have of black people. All that you see on the news is all that you have until you really get to meet people that don't look like you and don't live like you. There's no way that you can fully understand and grasp, which is not, it's not the fault of people that live in rural areas, but further educating themselves, that is the issue. That's where it lies, where it's your personal responsibility. You can grow up however you grew up, believing whatever you believe, taught whatever you were taught, but if you're not taking the steps to educate yourself further, you're doing the country and the world a disservice.
Right. And it's really, even just to kind of simplify it even more, is that, you know, we need to take steps to better understanding each other. And, you know, realizing that everybody's different, and, you know, there are plenty of cultures out there, especially in America. But personally, I think that a huge thing that drives racism in America is power. And and power oppresses people of all colors, and especially Black people in this case. And I think limiting that power is a big step, because people follow that power subconsciously, and when you don't have that power to follow, you're less likely to jump on that bandwagon, I feel. But really, like Anna said, it takes a lot of soul searching to realize faults of your own and to change those faults for the better. And I mean, all it takes is like a slightly uncomfortable to moderately uncomfortable conversation, just to begin to understand people who are different than you are.
Next question. What do you most fear about the future for you or your friends or your family?
I don't have any children yet, but I plan on having children eventually in my life, and those children are going to be Black children. And I fear having the conversation that I've seen my dad and my cousins give to their kids that are 3, 4, 5 years old. This is why these people don't like you. It's simply because of the color of your skin. This is why you are going to go through life, and you need to be careful the way you talk, the way you walk, the way you dress, the way you act. You need to hone it down, turn it down when you're in certain situations. I don't want to have those conversations with my kids. I want my kids to be able to be unapologetically themselves in any situation, in any setting, and not fear for their lives because of that. And that's one thing that I have the most fear of, is having those conversations with my kids. And I hope and I pray that by the time I have kids, that I won't have to have as dramatic as a conversation as I have heard my family have with each other.
Dan?
Well, I guess the only thing, I guess fear is not really the best word. I guess what I fear is that nothing happens. From everything that's going on now, is that, it's a hot topic right now. And there's other things going on with COVID and all that, but my fear is that nothing comes out of this. I don't think that's likely. Things are changing, as we speak, with the police situations, the police forces around the country. A lot of the policies are being relooked at. So, but the fear is that when all is said and done, this time next year, are we going to be in the same place? Mm-hmm. That's my fear. So.
What gives you hope as we find ourselves 2 weeks after?
Something that gives me hope is that several people have reached out to me, because I've been pretty vocal about it on social media and, sharing our experiences, like protesting and just thoughts in general. And I've had several people reach out to me whom I would not have expected to, which is kind of, I think, very positive, because it's pushing people out of their comfort zones to really stand with me, particularly saying, hey, like, I love what you're doing out there, and sharing their thoughts with me, and really having that dialogue, and it's getting people out of that stagnant complacency, I think, that is really giving me personally hope, because I speak for myself that I've also kind of been in that situation, where it's like you see something horrible on the news and you're just like, I don't know, like, what can I do? Right. And having people speak up and be a part of the solution is really giving me hope, especially with it being around the country, like every state now, which is amazing.
I think to a similar tune of what Stevie's saying, social media has given me a lot of hope in this whole movement, because social media really allows people all over the country and all over the world to stand together in one platform and have things trending, as they say, trending and being in the forefront of the news cycle, because we all know how things happen. We see something, we're outraged. 2 days later, the president said something, and that's the new news story. And we forget about that outrage that we were feeling. However, with social media, what I've noticed is my age group has not let this die. There's the momentum is still up here. The news may not be showing it as much, but people are still protesting in all 50 states every day, marching peacefully for change, and that's really given me hope, seeing how hard people are going for this cause now all over the world, but a big help to that has been social media and it's really opening the eyes of everybody, because the news shows what the news wants to show. The news shows what its viewers want to see, stops clips right before something happens, or cuts something short, or shows an angle that favors whatever the agenda they're pushing. And social media really gives that transparency, because we are at these marches. We are the ones videotaping and showing what's really happening at ground zero. And it brings awareness, like things we may not see on our news cycle, like Breonna Taylor, and she was murdered in her own home while she was sleeping because they did a no-knock raid and in the wrong neighborhood at the wrong time, and all of her killers are still out there, not charged and not in jail. They're living their life, and without social media, I wouldn't have known about that. I wouldn't have been able to sign a petition and donate to her legal funds, and it's incredible the way that social media has really propelled this movement, and for that I have a lot of hope, because it's still not losing any steam, and I think that the news would have already blown that candle out if it wasn't for social media.
And I similarly, what gives me hope about this, and it's sad to say, is that the number of white people that have seen how wrong this is and have stepped up to help. Even with the food drive, bringing stuff down to Holy Trinity. Things like that, because prior to this, when the black people have their protests or have things to say, it's not heard. And I know I talked to Pastor Lilliard about this, to see people that are outraged about this, that are other than black, that are standing up, that are writing and calling our politicians, our leaders, that are making a stance towards this. The affluent people who have ties to politicians and leaders and policymakers, those people that can call up their buddy or say, let's go play a round of golf, and have a conversation on the golf course about what's going on, even though it's not impacting them directly. It's all part of, our culture. But what gives me hope is to see those people, and that's what we need more of. The people outside of us, because up till now, we haven't been allowed enough voice. And when it turns to the rioting, that's what gets people's attention, even though we're not the ones rioting. Yes, some of us have joined in. There's bad eggs all over, but to see more people that have, you can call it better connections or what, but that's what gives me hope. So.
Our last question for you today is, what is the message that you would like others to hear from you?
Dan?
Well, from me, it's is that I'd like people to care. God says, love your neighbor, as you love yourself. That's what we need to do. And your neighbor isn't just the guy who lives across the street from you. It's we're all in this together. And it's funny the timing of how this has kind of worked with our series of sermons that are going on now. Rise Up this is a good time to rise up. I mean, and we talk about the words. There's certain words. What I'd like people to hear is, and unfortunately, I don't want to say be a good Christian, but I want to say, hey, if you believe in God and you believe in humanity and equality, I know people talk about equity, but you can't have equity without equality. So if you really care, do something, Donating food is nice. But I mean, don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. Don't be afraid to make a phone call, or if you believe this is wrong, then let someone know that you believe it's wrong. Because if you don't say anything, that's saying a lot. So that's, in my eyes, what I'd like them to hear. So.
Is that my message that I would like people to hear is it starts with you. You have to look in yourself and see. We can try and change the world, but we can't change the world if we're not changing ourselves within. If you have to recognize your privilege and recognize your bias and your prejudice and really take some time with yourself and say, what came from my parents, what came from what I see in the media, and what's real, where are the flaws in my thinking that are causing me to not be outraged by this, or to be outraged by this but feel pressured to be silent about it. Or I think it just begins with education and conversation, and there's so many resources out there to educate yourself on what's going on, and to start having those conversations with people that you think may be ignoring it, or just spreading the word, and yeah, I think just education and conversation is what I would like.
Yeah.
to start.
Something I would like people to get out of all this, kind of really going along with what Dad and Anna have been saying, is, you know, if you kind of see, if you're a witness to something that you know is wrong, you can either do nothing and nothing will happen, nothing will change for the better, or you could do something. And while you might feel like you're a drop in the bucket, like, all those drops come together to make a tidal wave. And I mean, I feel like we're seeing at least the start of that, but I mean, you can't do it unless everybody's on board.
One more thing to add. I saw a post that was saying, people watch this video of George Floyd and say, oh, I can't imagine how his mother feels, or I can't imagine how bad that is to watch that. Well, imagine it. Imagine how that feels. Imagine that is your child there under the knee of an officer while he's handcuffed, gasping for you, his mother, gasping for you in his last breath, watching him pass away on camera, and then hear the medical examiner say it was because of his pre-existing conditions. Imagine that, feel that pain, and let that pain stir something inside of you and make you so uncomfortable that you want to speak out and that you want to do something about it. Imagine, put yourself in the shoes of the people that you don't look like, that you may not identify with or understand. Put yourself in those shoes so that you can feel those feelings that we feel daily, that fear that we feel daily, and the pain, seeing another person that looks like our father or our brother killed on TV, on video. Put yourself in those shoes so you can feel that pain and be outraged and want to speak up and do something about it.
Well, we want to thank you for being with us here for this very rich and moving conversation. You know, we as faithful people want to be about the work of a more just world, and it can start and continue with the kinds of authentic sharing of feelings and stories that we want to listen to so that we might learn and grow into loving our neighbor, as you say, Steve, even more than we thought we were capable of. So we thank you for your honesty and being here today as we continue to grow and live as God's people in the world. So thank you for being here.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for joining us for this first edition of A More Just World. We hope you found helpful information, things that challenged you a little bit, things that make you wonder and question and reflect. So we look forward to having you join us as we go ahead with more learning, more listening, and more engaging in how we can be a part of making this a more just world.
And about this video in particular, I think we could have some things to talk about together. So check the St. Andrew website for ways that you can join a couple of conversation places or sessions that we will plan together to talk about what we've heard as we begin a very important process together as a church. Welcome.